We celebrate today the feast of the Holy Apostle Thomas, who was called Didymus. That is a Greek term that means twin. 3 times in the Gospel of John, he is called the twin. Meaning, well, in Tagalog, kambal. You know, I have a strange feeling that Thomas was called the twin, not because he had a twin brother. He must have been given that nickname because he had a tendency to be consistently double-minded about many things. In Tagalog, we have the expression, pagdadalawang isip. Half of him wanted to believe, but the other half did not. Perhaps a little bit like the Gollum character in the movie Lord of the Rings, who loved and hated the ring at the same time as he loved and hated himself. A kind of a split personality. The guy is often called Doubting Thomas. Actually, I do not think it was Jesus he doubted. It was rather his companions. The Gospel says Thomas was not with them the first time Jesus appeared to his disciples. You can sense from his reaction to his companions, who are very excited about having encountered the risen Jesus, that Thomas is sarcastic in his tone. Or there is even a tone of resentment in his remark when he says, "Oh, unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger into the nail marks and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." In short, I will not believe you. So, if you can read between the lines, you will hear him actually saying to his companions, "Sorry guys, but I don't trust any one of you anymore." This man is very wounded inside. He bears grudges. He has a certain woundedness in his relationship with his brothers, and he is hiding it. He is there the second time, but he's not really there with them yet. I think what John really meant was, he was around, but he was not really in talking terms with them yet. It makes sense now why the first thing the risen Jesus did when he appeared to his disciples in the upper room was to call attention to his hands and to his side. He was teaching them how to deal with their own woundedness if they wanted to be healed, and if they wanted to become healers themselves. They had to be like bruised little children whose bravery is tested when they are asked to show their wounds, to have them touched, to have them cleaned and dressed for a cure. I remember when I was a little boy, I got wounded and I didn't want to show it because my idea of the wound being treated was always associated with pain. Now, I imagine the hurting words that these guys were able to say toward each other when they retreated in the upper room after Jesus was crucified and laid in that borrowed tomb. Maybe a good parallel is what is presently happening to many people who have spent too much time or too long a time under quarantine together, to the point that they're already getting into each other's nerves. I hear a lot about such problems. They must have rubbed into Peter the fact that he had sworn to be ready to die for the Lord. He didn't even have the courage to stand for Jesus before a maidservant. They must have ridiculed James and John, who wanted to be positioned at the right and at the left of Jesus And yet they were quickly gone when the going got rough. Well, of course, we have at least one gospel that is claiming that John was there. But don't ask me who wrote it. They must have asked each other, where were you when he was arrested? When he was sentenced to death? When he was crucified? Luke tells us the two disciples had in fact already decided to quit. They had decided to retreat to the nearby village of Emmaus. I call them defectors. These disciples shared only one thing in common. After Jesus died, they were all badly wounded and traumatized. There is no end, to our capacity to hurt each other. Not just physically, but more painfully, emotionally, or even spiritually. Sometimes we don't realize that we say hurting words to each other. Our cruel words can cut, and the wounds can be really clean and deep. And these guys who surrounded Jesus were no exception. That is why I usually say that the real proof to the resurrection was not the empty tomb. It was rather the fact that the disciples, who should have disbanded already, held on together after that traumatic experience at Calvary. Even before Jesus, there had been already many leaders of movements who were thought to be the Messiah, but whose projects ended up as a failure, and who were eventually called messianic pretenders. Some of them also ended up on the cross like rebels. But their misadventures simply died a natural death. And their movements fell apart after the leaders were executed, because their members had no reason to stay together anymore. They merely disbanded. Don't you ever ask yourself the question, how come that did not happen to the Jesus movement? So the best evidence to the resurrection was not an empty tomb. It was rather the community that was born, the church, the community of disciples that stayed together through thick and thin and have remained in existence up to now for the past 2,000 years. How these disciples found their way back to each other's company, surmounting conflicts and mutual hurts, learning to forgive and to love each other with the love of Jesus. This is expressed beautifully by our first reading today from Ephesians chapter 2. Through Jesus, the whole structure is held together, and it grows into a temple sacred in the Lord. In Him, you also are being built together into that dwelling place of God in the Spirit. So after explaining what I call the possible background to the nickname Didymus, or why Thomas was called the twin, at one time in a Bible study, somebody asked me, how come the nickname stuck with Thomas, even after he had already confessed Jesus as his Lord and his God, and had already outgrown his double-mindedness? And my only guess is this. Well, I said, I suppose Thomas took pride of the name twin himself. Maybe he gave it a new meaning. Twin in the sense of Jesus look-alike. Tell me, would you mind being called a twin brother or a twin sister of Jesus?